Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming to join us here today for this session. It's actually a really exciting session for me and my team here. This is the first public launch of the user interface API as generally available API that's all built on top of Lightning platform. It's going to be great to show you what we've been up to the last 3 years. So who all here went to Dreamfest last night? Right on. Good. Yeah, we planned for a lot of demos because we figured, third day, Dreamfest, we got to keep it interesting in the afternoon. So it'll be a great session. I'm Kamyar. I'm the product manager for User Interface API, as well as Lightning Data Service. I'll talk about that relationship and why I own both products. Presenting with me is Chris Seymour. He's an architect on our team. And also Canis Lamb from one of our partners who gave us early feedback on the design of the API, and we really appreciate him being here and also for his feedback. And he'll show you some cool demos about Altify and how they use our platform. So what we'll talk to you about in our session is, first I'll give an overview of Lightning platform and how we fit into it as user interface API or role, and then we'll do some demos and show you some cool things, and then talk to you a little bit about our roadmap, and then answer any questions that might come up. You guys know this. So definitely we're going to share some roadmap stuff with you. I'm going to show you some things that we're planning for Spring 18 release, which is going to come out in February. So we are a public company. Please, 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 make your decisions based on what's available now, as opposed to the stuff that we're going to talk about that's forward-looking. And so Lightning platform. I know a lot of you, obviously, because you're in this session, are leaning towards development or developers. But what kind of mix do we have in terms of partners as opposed to customers? Can you raise your hand if you are partners? Awesome. Cool. I'm assuming the rest of you are customers. And then how many of you have built on Lightning platform already? Perfect. So you're familiar with our platform. It's really, when we talk about Lightning, it's the experience, the amount of work that we've put into bringing this new user interface to users of Salesforce. It sort of stretches across all the interfaces that we offer to users, be it desktop, mobile, watches, etc. And our platform is built to support all of that. And what makes that possible is really the framework that is underneath all this that allows us to have the stack that makes it so extensible across all these different formats and devices. And what that does, with the power that we bring in through the framework and the experience, is that it provides a nice, rich ecosystem for our customers as well as our partners who can then invest, build their own products, build their own extensions, and then make it all available to each other through App Exchange and other ways so that we can all just be happier using Salesforce. So let's take a quick look at the stack and where we fit in. So just recently, and I think you heard Mark talk about this in his keynote as well, we are actually rated the #1 low-code development platform right now in the cloud. And the reason is really this stack. So the stack is what makes it possible for us to give tools to novice developers or developers that just don't need to put a lot of effort into simple things so that they can do the simple development easier, but then also give them the tools to do the complex things. And as you go up the stack, it's all built on the #1 database in the cloud. But as you go up the stack, you go from complex expertise, solving hard problems, to solving simple things using building blocks that we provide for you. So if you think about our base components, these are the things that we built for Lightning that you can use to quickly build Lightning components, and they're all built on top of every layer below that then makes it such that if you want to do more complex things, you can access that part of the stack to do that. So Lightning Data Service and User Interface API are really the integration layer for Lightning Platform, and we're going to do a deep dive into that. So the cool thing about the User Interface API is that we basically took the expertise that we put into what makes Lightning Platform and Lightning Experience possible, and we made it available as public API so that you, our customers, our partners, can really use the framework of your choice, any of the things you see on the screen, whether it's Angular, React, native iOS, or Lightning. You can use anything to build apps on top of our platform or add it to your orgs. And if you're building on platform, then really that is where Lightning Data Service comes in, because Lightning Data Service is really the extension of the User Interface API if you're building in Lightning. And when we talked about before the stack model of, as you go up, we keep doing more for you so that it gets easier and you get from, high code to low code. There's things that we know that a developer has to do when they're using REST API. And from our perspective, if you're in Lightning, then we want to save you that time by doing a lot of those things for you, such as authentication, such as caching. And there's a lot of advantages into solving that problem for you, because that just gets you to build things a lot faster than if you just start with the raw API, if you just want to build on platform. And what you see here is essentially a one-to-one roadmap of the public API that we already have for User Interface API, and then the eventual Lightning Data Service modules that are going to give you that flexibility to build more complicated and more robust Lightning components. And we'll go into the roadmap in a little bit. But I want to turn it over right now and have Canis show you how Altify is leveraging User Interface API and what their existing app does. And we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamiar.
Sorry.
Oh, I might just do the slides first.
Oh, OK. Yeah, sorry about that. That's right.
Thanks. So at Altify, we help sales organizations win the deals that matter and maximize revenue from their key accounts through a guided selling process native in Salesforce. We've been on platform 100% native for the last 6 years. So we've been on the journey with the platform team as new capabilities come available. Our typical customer is a large enterprise with a large sales team selling complicated things. And I just want to show you some of our UI to give you a sense for what we're trying to do and then what we need from the platform in order to be able to do it. So when you're working these large deals, you have to be thinking about who you're selling to. Normally there's multiple sellers. We provide a visualization, this kind of org chart with extra attributes. It's very visual. Another consideration is what the sales folks call white space, which is trying to understand where you may have sold one product to a customer, can you sell them something else? Or if you sold to one division, can you sell to a different division? And again, we've kind of come up with our own custom visualization around that. And a third one is to be able to map out with the customer, well, what are the customer's goals and what are their challenges that we can help them with? And get to a common place where both we and the customer understand how we can work together and make that happen. So, and our marketing team would hate me for saying this, but from a technical perspective, you can think of us like a plug-in to Sales Cloud for sales methodology guided selling. We don't need to be there for every deal, but for the deals that matter, we're there and we can help. So from a user experience perspective, we want to feel completely seamless inside Salesforce. We don't want this user to go through this context switch as they switch from Salesforce to us, and as I'm going to show you, back into Salesforce again. We want all that to feel really seamless. And at the same time, we want to respect the clicks, not code. So if admins have gone to the trouble of setting up page layouts with rules and validation and profiles, we want to be able to tap into that and not ask them to configure a whole bunch of extra stuff just for us. From a technical stack perspective, then, those kind of complex UIs you saw, they're HTML5 applications. We use AngularJS extensively to build them. So, we've always been looking for, well, how can we kind of get from that environment into Salesforce when we need to, and back again. So I'm now going to cut over and just give you a sense for our product today, and then how it's now can take advantage of this user interface API. Oops. Okay, and the use case we're going to focus on here is you're doing your white space analysis, and part of doing that is to kind of explore, hey, I think this division here, Ancaster Services, I think we have an opportunity to sell them Account Manager. But it's only a thought. We don't want to put this in our pipeline yet, because if we do, our sales manager is going to start beating us up going, okay, so where are we with that deal? So it's a notional deal. But at some point, you feel good enough about that deal to convert it into a real opportunity. And we want to be able to do that straight from here. So here is what the user does today. They're going to click on, and this is an Angular application you're looking at here. They're going to click on that application. They're going to go and qualify this potential opportunity, and they get to here. Okay, and basically this is our poor man's version of the declarative Salesforce UI in order to be able to capture some basic opportunity details. So we do the metadata queries, we present the information on screen, and the user can fill in that. But every org is different, there's custom fields, there's all that kind of thing, and there's different page layouts for different users. So there's a lot of limitations here. It doesn't look particularly like Salesforce, and also, the admin has had to go and actually use custom settings to tell the system, well, there's actually this custom field called geos here that's very specific to one particular customer, that has to show up in our profile, because if it doesn't, then when we try and save this opportunity, we're going to get an error. So by contrast, if I go over here into Lightning, and this is just the standard create new opportunity screen, that's actually the target. That's the kind of experience we want to be able to deliver from within our app at the right time. And we have this use case for creating contacts, creating tasks, other things as well. It's not just opportunities. So now, in our next version, you'll see here, same kind of white space screen. All right, come on. Oh, I'm sorry, click here. And I click the same button here, and I click this. But now what's happened is, using the user interface API, we've queried all the metadata around this page layout for the opportunity, and we've used the Lightning design system to represent something. It's not, our current version is not exactly the same, as in the widths are a bit different, but you'll see that it's more or less the same thing. And it does things like, it's figured out that there's a default value for geos. It's put that in for us as well. So to sum up, our current version, there's extra configuration required by the admins to make this happen. There's limitations in terms of things like default values, knowing the subtleties of what's on what page layout. So really, right now, we effectively enforce one layout for all profiles, and it doesn't look like Salesforce. Whereas now, taking advantage of the UI API, we can get it to look like Salesforce, behave like Salesforce, and no extra configuration. So if anyone's interested to learn more, we do have a booth, 1714 in the Customer Success Expo. Also, our chairman will be talking about how AI can help with guided selling tomorrow. And also, some of my colleagues are in the final of the App Exchange Demo Jam. So please come and check us out. Okay. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you, Kenneth. Cool stuff. So let's talk quickly about, again, some of the use cases. I just wanted to highlight a few points where, I'm sure you've all been with Salesforce for a really long time. We have a lot of API. Tooling, metadata, S-object, there's tons of API. So a lot of people ask me, even internally, well, why do we need another API? Why do we need user interface API? And just to highlight, a lot of the reasons are captured here, because we are taking the things that we know every UI developer needs to do, and we're doing it for you. And this is the same API that our feature teams use to build their applications on top of Salesforce. So, for example, our API will give you metadata and data. And if you are, for example, fetching a list of fields, our API gives you the ability to constrain it by a layout type, like a full or a compact layout. And what that does, that it helps you honor any metadata configuration changes that, let's say, a package or an admin makes to that layout, because now we just send you any new fields or any fields that have been removed, we remove it, so your application doesn't have to do that in its code. You basically say, I'm going to ask for a layout, and I'm going to trust that this API is going to give me all the fields that go into that layout with the data. The other thing is we've built a lot of business logic into Lightning, such as the ability to clone. There's no API for that, such as giving you default values. That's pretty cool. It's pretty handy. You saw a demo of that. We also give you information on localization and language support right in the payload, so that your app, essentially when you offer it, if somebody goes in and makes those changes for their settings, that our API reflects them. Plus, the same API actually supports different form factors. So we talked about layouts a second ago. So the cool thing about layouts is an admin can go in and say, I want these fields here, and I want them to be arranged in these columns, right? And that looks great on a desktop. But then how do you do the arrangements when you want to show the same fields in a mobile app? Now, Chris is going to show you that in a second, but the evolution of our API is we originally built this, and it still supports Salesforce, the mobile app, formerly known as Salesforce1. And so we have a lot of logic that says, OK, if we have this full layout, and we're showing it in a mobile device, then we're going to take the columns, and we're going to actually, instead of showing them in two, put the fields in a single column format so that you can render it easier. So we do all that work for you so that, again, you don't have to, and your apps can be, let's say, responsive if you're building on Heroku. And then we also do one of the hardest things when it comes to developing on Salesforce, which is access checks, FLS, record sharing, all these things where you have to have code that says, OK, if I go get this field for this user and they don't have access to it, I'm going to get an error. So now my code has to know how to handle that error. Our stuff just basically says if you ask for a layout and somebody doesn't have access to a particular field in that layout, we just don't send the field to you. You're good to go. And this is what we do already for Salesforce, the mobile app, as well as Lightning Desktop. And the other cool thing about our API is that they use the same API org limits that you already probably are familiar with if you're using other Salesforce API, so there's nothing different about that either. And let's go to some other demos. So Chris is going to take you through that.
Hi. Oh, we don't have the URL here. So I'm going to go through a couple demo apps. There's versions of them that work against the existing release on GitHub, on force.com GitHub. So we have both a React Native-based app and a Node.js web app.
So I got fancy and did animation on this slide so that when we come back and hit the button, it'll show you the links. But, here they are too.
So here we are in a opportunity on an org. So it's just a regular opportunity. We got all these fields in the layout. And I've built a React Native app in iOS. If I go to this record, so this just makes one API call to the user interface API. It's returning us entity information, presentational layout metadata, and the data all at once. So it's one XHR or one HTTP request. And this is giving us the same stuff that's there. And we've requested it using the small form factor. So it's doing the conversion of the two-dimensional layout into something one-dimensional, just like we do in the Salesforce mobile app. And you can also make changes through the API doing patches. And you can, including making stuff around pick lists. So just changing some pick list values here and some other stuff. And this is all in that sample code that's on GitHub. So we go back, then our changes are there. So it's really about having endpoints that aggregate a lot of stuff together for you. This is using the record UI endpoint, which is the endpoint that pulls those three things together. We also have separate endpoints for retrieving all those things independently, and endpoints around defaults and clone and pick lists. And we do some stuff with pick lists that has been hard to do or boilerplate on your own. So one of the exciting new things at Salesforce is now we've got Quip integrated into Salesforce. So if you take a look over here, on this opportunity, we can create a new Quip document. So we make a new Quip doc and open it up here.
And this is cool because Quip is actually using the user interface API to build this integration because they just thought that it was really easy to work with and it gave them a common experience with what users would see then in our app.
So if you try this out, I think this is live soon on Quip. You can just add, they're calling live apps, so you can add all these different applications within your Quip document. So one of them is called Salesforce Record. You can insert that. Lets you pick a record, same one. It drops it in. Then you can add whatever fields you want. And it has a live view of your Salesforce record in your Quip document. So this is making use of the user interface API as well, because the Quip code is calling in to us to get the metadata about the object and to get the data and to get it all efficiently all at once.
And Quip is doing some really cool stuff now with Salesforce. They actually have a keynote right after our session upstairs. I have a slide that talks about it. I really encourage everybody to go check it out. They're going to show you their vision of how they want to bring collaboration with Salesforce records and objects to the business world. So this is just a preview to get everybody looking at what it takes to work with the same API so that you're familiar with the shape and take advantage of the consistency that you get between then all the surfaces, including Salesforce's Lightning and mobile apps.
So yeah, they also have write support. So if you have access, you can just save a draft here, and then write it back to Salesforce, and it shows up. And you can also just click on the link, and it takes you back to Salesforce. So it's a pretty good, solid integration we have going with Quip now. And I think we're going to go back to the presentation.
You got one more.
Oh, should I do that one too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. So this is actually a cool demo. So this is actually, we're going to show you a feature that is part of our API that's being released in Spring 18. How many here have worked with dependent pick lists?
They're really
Awesome.
fun, right?
That is, man, we have a good crowd. Okay, so who thought it was actually pretty easy to work with? Nice.
All
okay.
right.
Well, we've essentially done our best to let you build dependent pick lists as quickly as you possibly can, as far as a UI for it. So why don't you show them the upcoming feature, which is the dependent pick list graph, as we call it.
Sure. So this is the Node.js sample app. This is a new version of it, but the version for the current public API is that one at GitHub. We've added a new endpoint just to get the directory of the entities that are available for you through the user interface API. You can, in the sample app, you can make a new account and set some stuff up, and it should work. If we look at an existing record here, we can show, this is the JSON that was used to render this. So it was 1xhr. In this payload, we got the layout information. So here's the view layout. Here's all the sections that we're rendering.
So you're actually seeing another upcoming feature, which is our e-tag invalidation headers.
Oh yeah, right here. We're adding e-tags in the next release with all the full e-tag.
So where that will
304
help
support.
you is if you're building an app, especially for mobile apps, where you make a call and let's say you get a record and its layout and its object metadata. What happens is typically those things don't change, right, throughout the course of a day or even months. And what the e-tags do, it's a unique identifier that lets you build the cache and then make it the same API call by passing that key back to us. And then if the payload hasn't changed, we return a 304, HTTP 304 message to you, and that will tell you that the information you have is good. So it should really cut down on network traffic and data usage, as well as just the responsiveness of your app. And then if you're doing caching, it should definitely help you with that as well.
Yeah, so this is using the aggregate payload. So we have both an e-tag at the top and also an e-tag for each of the independent things you can retrieve from the layout and metadata and data endpoints. So here I'm just showing this has like the first layout section and some of the item descriptions. And that's within the layout map. We also have the record. This gives you all the record data. And then we have object info. And this includes the entity metadata for the record that you're visiting and related records, because you also want to have information about those to display them. If we take a look at account, we have this new property that's coming in the next release called dependent fields. That's giving you a graph of the dependent fields in this entity. So in this case, we have country at the top, language and state province are controlled by country, and city is controlled by state province. I think we've also added in the field information.
Yep. So each field will have the same information.
Yeah.
So each field will tell you all of its dependent fields and all of its controlling fields.
Yeah, so this is telling you the controlling fields of city are state, province, and country in order going up.
Right.
So then using all that information, we quickly, my colleague Vishal and I, threw this together in a couple days. We're adding support.
Like literally in a couple of days, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We added support for a dependent graph editor. So even if the fields that are involved in the dependency hierarchy aren't all on the layout, sometimes you want to edit them all at the same time. Because it doesn't make a lot of sense to change the city and the country but not change the state at the same time. So we threw this together. We'll put this up in the sample app when the next release goes out. And this is using all that information from that dependency graph and those controlling fields. So we easily just set this thing up where if you change the country, it makes sure everything underneath stays consistent. Then if you change other stuff, it's kind of all cascading through.
So the graph view is really kind of handy, especially if you think about a mobile experience. It could be pretty sort of jarring for a user if they click on a field. You'd have to tell them, oh, wait, before you can change this, you got to go change this other one. And then they're like scrolling up or down, trying to figure out what that thing is. So we built this sample modal where it puts it all together. And then you present them with just one screen where they can change everything that sort of goes together.
So along with that, we have this new endpoint that gives you all the pick list values for a specific record type across all the fields. So that's what this is making use of when we're hitting edit in the background. We're retrieving all those values from that new endpoint. And this kind of breaks down all the stuff that you need to actually have the values for those pick lists. The stuff I was showing earlier is the relationships between the fields, and these are all the pick list values for all the fields for this particular record type. So you get it all at once. So we render these independent pick lists and these dependent pick lists. That's all based on this one payload, which is new in the next release.
Okay. Cool stuff. All right, thank you, Chris.
Okay.
See, I had the little click thing going. All right, so again, we're really excited about this stuff. It's public, it's GA. I'll share the list of endpoints with you. As we use our own API, our apps are a little bit simple when it comes to UI. We didn't style them with SLDS. We'll get there one day, but it was more important for us to get the sample code out to you so you can go get it, play with it. Give us feedback, please. We're in the success community, user interface API. I've already had a few conversations with some of the MVPs, some really good feedback. But I talked about how many different varieties of API we have at Salesforce. So I wanted to just get this out there in terms of what our recommendations are for using the API. They're really, as the name says, they're meant for building UI. And so in contrast, if I know many partners and customers use our SObjects API to do data integration. So we encourage you to keep doing that because our API is really not meant for data integration, mainly because of the metadata impact, right? Like if you're integrating data, you want all the fields. You don't want the fields that are bound by a layout. So it's just, we have those API, they're great, use them, keep using them. We use the same limits. And then if you're working in Lightning, like I said, we already do the work for you that does the serialization, the caching, and you're going to get these API as part of Lightning Data Service. But if you want to spend some time, learn about the API, the shape is consistent between the REST and the JavaScript that you'll see in Lightning. So there's advantages to that. Like let's say you want to have an app that is mobile, is native, but then your desktop experience is built on top of Lightning. From a development standpoint, it's all the same shape API, it's the same functionality. You don't have to learn nuances of two different things. So there's definitely benefits there. And one of the things I want to call out is we plan to be very proactive about encouraging our customers and our partners to update their apps when the 3-year cycle for versions are up. So Salesforce API support cycle is that after 3 years, we may choose to deprecate older versions. So the idea is for the user interface API, we would like to keep people fresh using the latest version so we won't keep old versions around like our other API that you might know go all the way back to, what is it, version 7 or 8. I think we just deprecated version 6. Our current version is 42. So, so we're trying to be more proactive, as I said. But those are kind of the gotchas. These are the GA endpoints. So a lot of functionality around records. The team just did a fantastic job getting stuff done. We actually even added file supports. I mentioned the clones and the default values. We also did some work with other teams to expose some other functionalities. I think dependent lookups are huge. For those of you who want to build UI associating records, we now have a lookup endpoint that allows you to do full search for finding related records or type ahead, like the full functionality. It's really, really cool. And our app experience team built an API for their favorites feature. So if you're familiar with the star at the top, that now has a user interface API. So if you want to, build a component or build an app that uses the favorites list, this gives you a way to do that. And we also exposed an API for the list of actions. So previously, I used to also be the PM for actions. We just transitioned it to a new PM. And one of the things about actions in Salesforce Mobile and Lightning Desktop is that up to this point, the only way you could find out what actions are valid for a record or a list, et cetera, was through SOCL. And so we wanted to make sure that if you're building UI, you don't use like REST API and then turn around and have to figure out how to work with SOCL to find out the actions that go with a particular record. But the actions endpoint is still a work in progress. So it gets you a lot of the way there. But look for version 2, 3 until we make it fully complete so that you can use it all by itself when it comes to, let's say, clicking new and being able to have the endpoint that says this is, for example, the default values that you can get for this opportunity because you're hitting new from opportunity. So check it out. Give us your feedback. This is some stuff that's coming out. So for Spring 18, a lot of cool stuff. I talked about e-tags. Chris showed them to you. We quickly went over the functionality of when you would use invalidation headers. We also added an API endpoint that gives you a list of all the objects that we support in the user interface API. For those of you who are familiar with Lightning, you know that not everything is supported yet in Lightning. So our API has to sort of honor that as well. But it was confusing, I thought, for our customers and our partners to be building stuff and then having to refer to documentation to figure out, okay, is this object supported or is not supported? So we have a list. So you hit the endpoint, it tells you all the objects that are supported. Most of them are. Lists are coming. Lists are really, really cool. You'll be able to actually fetch list of records based on list view ID, as well as get list metadata, the column, sort order, et cetera. And then you also saw the dependent pick list graph. And to quickly wrap it up, that's the stuff that's in our plans for the future. We want to give you bulk record save functionality, as well as related lists and field sets. So if you're working with field sets, this is kind of our entryway into getting field sets to start working in Lightning. And again, the stack is UI API, Lightning Data Service, Lightning Components. Cool. So check out these sessions. The Quip keynote, they're going to talk about that upstairs right after us. And then Chris is going to do another deep dive tomorrow morning on the user interface API again. If you guys want to go over there, because I'm only leaving a minute for Q&A. But they promised us an extra couple of minutes. If you have questions, please come up. Otherwise, we'll hang out back there and answer any questions you have.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess everybody's running to the Quip thing. Good. Hi.
Oh, can you try using the mic?
Yeah, so for your demos, you showed the creation of new records in the two different separate demos, and there was no choice, like a user would have to select a record type. Just curious if you're using like the default record type available for the user profile on that, because in a scenario where you have multiple record types on an object, how would you use the user interface API to pull up the correct layout for a record type without allowing the selection?
The demo, I haven't gotten around to adding that part of the functionality to the demo. You can get the default values per record type, I believe. Yeah, so we can hit our endpoint. We have an endpoint that's the create default values endpoint and also a clone values endpoint. So you call that to give you a pre-populated record, and that includes the record type on the URL.
Right. And then if you want just like all the record types for an object, then that's part of our object metadata endpoint, which we call object info. So if you send in a record ID and you get the object info back or ask for it by the object name, then that basically tells you all the record types that go with that object. We just didn't, like Chris said, we didn't have time to work that into the demo.
Yeah, 'cause I was playing with it. I didn't see the UI where you could actually say send a record type ID in, or by name or whatever, dev name, and get back the layout for that.
No, okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
We'll take a look at that. Thanks.
The part about the e-tags is really interesting. If there's been a change, say, to some fields and you send the e-tag, will it send a partial back that's smaller, or does it still send the whole thing back?
No, at this point, we just return all or nothing.
Okay. Yeah. Useful to know. And the pick list, is that supporting standard state and country pick lists as well right now? Or,
I'm seeing a nod yes.
Because I've heard of that being a big pain point in Visualforce and Lightning development up until now. So
Yeah, they're tricky. And
Yeah,
I think
this is definitely a
Thomas is
differentiator.
smiling knowingly over there, so he, I think, is our expert on the details on that.
okay, cool, thanks.
All right. I think we're out of time. If anybody has any other questions, we're back there. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.